As many of you know, we've been studying over the past number of weeks through the Gospel of Luke. And particularly over the last several, the portion of the Gospel that we have been in, the portion that we've been looking at, is actually an extended sermon that's taught by Jesus and recorded here in Luke. The passage that we're looking at today is no different. This is actually the conclusion to Jesus' sermon. This ties a bow onto our last several weeks of Jesus' teaching. So as we get ready to jump in, let's kind of quickly remember where we've been. Jesus says, kind of at the front end of this sermon, he says, "Blessed are those who are disadvantaged now." That might not seem to be the case. Being poor and hungry and weeping and reviled sounds more like curses than it does blessing. But Jesus says, blessed are those who are disadvantaged now, because greater riches are coming in the kingdom. So happy is the one who pursues the kingdom and all the present hardships that it entails, because their future reward is going to be far greater. This is countercultural stuff in Jesus' day and in ours. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes on from there and to go even further. He says, above that, I tell you, blessed are those who disadvantage themselves even for their enemies. Not only those who impoverish themselves to lend to a brother, not only those who go hungry now to feed their children, not only those who weep now to comfort a friend, but happy are those who incur all the same disadvantages in order to bless those who actively hate and hurt them. Why? How could that possibly be a good thing? Who would ever give to someone who's robbing from them? Who would ever be generous to a person who's only going to use that generosity to fund and support their active opposition of the giver? Well, the Father does. He's always giving. He's abundantly generous to us. Think of all of the blessings and the provision and the good gifts that the Lord gives to us, that the Lord has given to you, even considering the frequency with which you take those gifts and use them to worship someone or something other than Him. The Lord has done this. Even as Jesus preaches this sermon, He's preparing to do this. He's been made poor for the sake of these disciples who are listening and for our sake, that by His poverty we might be made rich. He's going to the cross to die for them and to die for us, not because we were friends of God. He's going to the cross to die for them, to die for us while we were yet enemies. So Jesus teaches, do you want to be my people? Then follow the pattern of my kingdom. Be merciful as your Father is merciful. He goes on to say, here's ways to do that, not judging or condemning, but giving and forgiving generously. Last week we looked at how we're to become more like Jesus, more merciful like Jesus, more merciful that we might help our brothers in times of need. If you haven't picked up on it yet at this point, this is a very convicting sermon that Jesus teaches. I hope, as we walked through it over the last number of weeks, that all of us together have found this challenging, that we've found this convicting. Because there is an overall arc to this sermon that goes something like, blessed are those who do this. I say do that like even for your enemies, but you aren't even doing this for your brothers. Right? Jesus says, love your enemies, and we're still finding it difficult to not pick at the faults of our brothers. So how is it that Jesus concludes this sermon? He's just said, be merciful, and then Jesus listed things that his people must do and must not do to one another. Why does he do that? Why does that matter? Why does it matter so much what they do? Doesn't Jesus really just care about the heart? Isn't it about a heart of being merciful? Not just kind of stacking up merciful actions? Maybe if you're here today and you aren't yet a follower of Jesus, that this might even be a question that you just kind of have in general. Why do Christians seem to care so much about the rules? Why do they make such a big deal about the things that you're supposed to do or the things that you're not supposed to do? Now, there are definitely people who call themselves Christians that you could ask that question to. And the answer that they would give you would sound something like, oh, no, that's not it at all. We don't. It's not about the rules at all. What you do or don't do doesn't really matter. It's just about a relationship with Jesus. He loves you. He's not judging what you do. He just cares about your heart. I'm not going to give you that answer because I don't think Luke would give you that answer. And I can guarantee you that Jesus wouldn't give you that answer. I think in our passage today, Jesus' next two illustrations answer that question for us. Why do Christians make such a big deal about what you should do or not do? Why does it matter so much, brother or sister, what you do and what you say? What you do and say matters because your actions reveal what your heart treasures. And what your heart treasures will determine if you stand on the last day. What you do and say matters because it reveals, your actions are revealing your heart. They're showing your heart to be what it is, to show what your heart treasures. And that is the determinative question. That will determine if we stand on the last day. Let's look at this passage again and see kind of how Jesus brings us to this conclusion. He says, a good tree doesn't produce bad fruit. On the other hand, a bad tree doesn't produce good fruit, for each tree is known by its fruit. Figs aren't gathered from thorn bushes, or grapes picked from a bramble bush. A good person produces good out of the good stored up in his heart. An evil person produces evil out of the evil stored up in his heart. Here's the principle. For his mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. This is kind of his first illustration that he uses, right? These fruit trees. My oldest two, Coleman and Gilbert, they're 7 and 6 now. Their ages are always changing. That's the thing with kids. The numbers always change. Coleman and Gilbert's favorite thing to do, if you don't already know them or know this, is all day long to play soccer 1v1 downstairs against each other in our playroom. Our new house, the one kind of big room on the side of the basement, has like a large, no longer functional fireplace and chimney kind of built into the one wall. So we're just kind of turning that fireplace. We gave them that room so that fireplace could just get converted into an indoor soccer goal, right? And Lewis, the 2.5-year-old, always wants to get in on the game action, but he can never quite figure out how, right? He'll come and he'll ask me to help him put on his little soccer jersey because the boys are about to play a game. And if they're taking like penalty kicks or something, he'll jump into the rotation and he'll take turns. But when they're just kind of playing against each other one-on-one, he just can't ever seem to find a way to like get in there and get a touch on the ball without getting knocked over every 10 seconds. And so the other day, he comes running to me just all excited. And he just comes up and with his plan, and he just comes up kind of yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, I be referee. I be the referee." And I was like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Like, have fun." Only for him to come back upstairs like 2 minutes later, very angry and very frustrated. So I kind of set my book down. I got up to kind of see what the trouble was. And he informed me that his referee whistle was not working. And he kind of took the lanyard off of his neck and he held it up to me and he showed me a thumb drive. And no matter how many times he put that thumb drive into his mouth and blew on the end of it, it just wouldn't whistle. Why? Well, it's for the same reason that you won't like download any files successfully if you stick a whistle into a USB port. Like data doesn't come out of a whistle. And shrill blasts of sound don't come out of a thumb drive. Figs don't come out of thorn bushes. Grapes don't come out of brambles. A good tree doesn't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree doesn't produce good fruit. I don't think we need a whole lot of explanation here about Jesus' illustration. It really kind of explains itself. A tree is known by its fruit. Jesus says, so it is with hearts and actions. Good treasure stored up in the heart produces good action. Evil stored up in the heart produces evil action. Not only action, but words too. He says the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. Jesus gives the interpretation of the fruit tree illustration, which is this: what's inside comes out. Right? Point blank, what's inside comes out. That seems really straightforward, doesn't it? Yeah. Which probably begs the question, if it's so straightforward, why do we conclude differently so often? Have you ever found yourself excusing something that you did or said by kind of assuring people that it doesn't accurately reflect how you feel inside? I know I did blank, but deep down I really do love them. I know I said such and such, but in my heart I really meant this. That doesn't seem to fit with what Jesus says here. I remember having a conversation one time with someone who admitted, they said, I know I have a difficult time with being kind. I usually say things that I regret, but I don't want them to think that I'm a terrible person. I wish that they could see my heart. If that's you, if you realize that you have thought that way, that you are thinking that way, can I please humbly submit to you that it is not them that need to see your heart. The one who needs a better, clearer understanding of your heart is you. If what comes out in your words and in your actions is impatience and unkindness and things that you wish you could take back, and you assume that if only people could see inside, they would find goodness and wholeness and kindness and love, you would be the one who's mistaken about what's in there. Figs don't come from thorn bushes. Whistles don't come out of thumb drives. What's inside comes out, and whatever comes out accurately reflects what's inside. I think this is kind of a helpful moment to pause and consider and ask. I don't know that we ask this enough. What is the inner man like? What goes on inside of us, inside of a person? How does it work? Psychologist Carl Jung once famously said that you are what you do. Is that true, that you are what you do? If you peeled back the layer of your heart like an onion, would you find that what you do is at the core of who you are? Or would you find, as seems to be kind of more commonly believed today, that what really makes you you is your emotions? That you aren't what you do, but rather you're what you feel. And that authenticity means kind of getting in touch with these core emotions that make up who we are. This is kind of the Pixar's Inside Out theory for what makes humans tick, right? Inside is a group of emotions like joy and sadness. Or what are the other three? Fear and anger and disgust. And they're kind of at the control center that makes up the person. If you asked Abraham Maslow, he would tell you that you're a bundle of needs. That's what we are. We're kind of a collection of needs. That the inner life of every person is just a series of needs, kind of needs that all exist in a hierarchy. They all exist kind of simultaneously, but they have to be satisfied at certain times with certain needs kind of in the hierarchy taking natural priority over others. So what are we? Are we a compilation of our actions? Are we an organic machine with emotions kind of pushing the buttons and pulling the levers? Are we a complex bundle of needs? I think a more biblical model looks something like this. At the root of who we are is what we believe. The charge kind of levied against those who reject and oppose Jesus is not just failing to do something. It's not just kind of feeling the wrong things in response to Jesus. The charge is unbelief. In the garden, this is directly what the enemy targeted. He goes straight for belief. Did God really say? at its sin, at its root, is wrong belief about God. All of creation is engaged in a struggle of belief, a struggle between truth and falsehood that claims to be true. Paul talks about it this way in Romans. He says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, that's kind of the cosmic struggle. When Jesus was standing before Pilate, Pilate asks him about his purpose. Jesus replied, "For this reason I was born. For this reason the Son of Man came into the world to testify to the truth." He makes a truth claim. This is the stated purpose that John gives for why he wrote his gospel. He says, these things are written so that you may believe. That by believing you might have life. Because at your core is what you believe. You can either believe the truth of God, which is life, produces good out of the good treasure, or a lie, which leads to death and produces rotten, inedible fruit. So what we believe produces something. Something comes out of what we believe. First, it produces loves and fears. Now, some argue that loves and fears are actually the base, that what you love and what you fear is the root. This is where guys like Dr. Gary Chapman would land. If you don't know him by name, you might be familiar with his 5 love languages. He kind of posits the idea that all humans are love tanks, and that these love tanks are kind of filled and depleted by giving and receiving love in different ways or in different love languages, and that everyone has particular love languages that fill their tank, some more than others. But I really don't think that this is how love is cultivated. What we love and what we fear sits downstream. It flows out of what we believe. Wrong belief followed by wrong love is idolatry. And it's not like the love is the good thing and the fear is the bad thing. Like right belief produces both right loves and right fears. Wrong belief produces wrong loves and wrong fears. Love and fear are both things that the scriptures talk about as good and healthy, but the right ones being produced by right, true beliefs. And it's actually kind of like from those loves and fears that spring up our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. That's why Paul can instruct us to take every thought captive. Because your thought isn't who you are. It's coming from somewhere. It's being produced by something. Your thoughts are a product. The same with your feelings and your emotions. We've kind of fallen in love with the word authentic. In many ways, we use authentic as kind of truth and authenticity interchangeably. But they're not. You can authentically feel something that has absolutely no basis in the truth. You can believe a lie, and it can produce real, strong feelings and emotions that are based off of that lie. But are you happy with that? Are you comfortable settling for that to just say, well, I don't know if this is true or not, but I know it's authentic. I know it's real. I know it's genuine. I genuinely felt those things, and that's kind of enough for me. Is that the bar? Are you good with acting on something just because you genuinely felt it? And not kind of like stopping to care whether what you believe is actually true or not? Because again, like all of these are producing things. What you believe is producing loves and fears, which is producing thoughts and feelings and emotions, which are producing words and actions. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth is speaking. Those words and actions kind of repeated over and over, forming behaviors. And good is produced from the treasure of right belief stored up in the heart. Evil is being produced from wrong belief stored up in the same. For the mouth speaks out of the overflow of the heart. Despite everything that we've been conditioned to believe by our kind of postmodern psychological approaches to understanding the inner workings of the human psyche, this is who we are. This is how we are. This is how we're made. This is the picture of the human heart that the scriptures paint for us. And I guarantee that if you believe this and you begin kind of operating under the assumption that this accurately represents how you tick, you'll see a lot more success at being able to understand what's going on under the hood, being able to take captive and be intentional about what's being produced, for it to not all just be accidental. Especially to you guys sitting up front who are still kind of like working your way through high school, right? If you can figure this out now and believe this now and go through the next number of years in your life not believing, no, my emotions are always accurate. Like our emotions change wildly. If you can learn to distrust them, to trace them back and see, where do they come from? What am I loving and fearing? What am I ultimately believing? If you can get this now, you'll save yourself a lot of heartache, a lot of misunderstanding. Because just like very practically speaking, what do you do when you find bad fruit? Raise your hand if you have 0 bad fruit on the tree. Like all of us find bad fruit in our lives, right? What do you do? Because the visible things, the words and the actions that come out, they're the easiest to notice. They're the check engine lights. You see them flashing first, usually before you hear or kind of see anything under the hood. But what they're telling you when they start flashing, when the words and actions come out and you're like, ooh, that was bad. It's saying, hey, check under the hood. You need to see what's wrong. If a tree's unhealthy, before you ever notice a problem with the roots, the first evidence is probably going to be poor fruit on the tree. And when you notice unhealthy fruit on the limbs, the assumption is that there's something wrong in the roots. So what do you do when you notice bad fruit? If you can, trace it backwards. Why did I do or say this? What was I thinking or feeling that kind of made me say this? What am I loving or fearing that's kind of driving those thoughts and those emotions? What must I be believing that would produce that love or that fear? This is a really valuable and fruitful practice to develop. But even when you can't trace it all the way out, even when things feel more confusing, even when you're unsure, the beauty of the way that God created us is that each of these things kind of produces the next. And at the end of this fountain kind of bubbling up from what we believe, we actually notice a cycle, because our behaviors, those things that we regularly practice, are going to help to kind of shape and influence what we believe. So if you notice bad fruit, find kind of any point along this path that you can intervene and start there. If your emotions are producing wrong action and you can challenge and confront those emotions instead of just trusting them, do it. Distrust your emotions, regardless of how authentic they may be. If you've identified kind of wrong beliefs or wrong loves, but you're not sure how to change them, like pay close attention to the things that you do and say. Change your pattern of behavior. Change the activities that you engage in. Change the way that you talk. Like those things will help to influence what you believe. If you're struggling with kind of like the wrong belief that your life and all the people in it are a burden to you, they're not. That would be a wrong belief, right? But how many of us have at one point or another felt like everything is just a burden on me? My job, my kids, my family, my day, everyone around me is so burdensome. One of the most effective ways that I know to kind of regularly challenge and adjust that is just to like force yourself to stop saying, I have to do this and I have to do that, and kind of start making it a point to say, I get to do this and I get to do that. Because it changes. It changes how you begin thinking about it. It changes how you begin feeling about it. It changes what you believe about it as you begin intentionally practicing those things. Because these aren't little things. This stuff matters. When the check engine light comes on, you're not doing yourself any good by just ignoring it. You have to pop the hood. And if you can't tell what's wrong, you have to take it into the shop. Not just put a kind of sticker over it and pretend you don't see it. If you saw cracks forming around the base of your house in places where they shouldn't be, would you just assume that all houses probably have that? If you started kind of like noticing moisture seeping into places that it hadn't before, would you just say, Probably nothing. I mean, after all, I know the house was built on a good foundation. No, you wouldn't do that. You would assume there could be an issue. And you would be worried about what that issue might be. You would want to know kind of ASAP how serious it was. You would get someone out to kind of go into all of the crawl spaces and look at it to find out what's going on. Because I see cracks and I see moisture, and I don't think that's supposed to be that way. So where's this coming from? Why are you so much less concerned with your heart? Why do you see the fruit that gets produced by your heart and conclude, that's inconsequential? I just need everyone to cut me some slack. Why do we chalk it up to some kind of circumstantial excuse? We have a magnet on our fridge that Coleman looked at the other day, and he asked me, Dad, why does that magnet say, I'm sorry for what I said when I was hungry? And I started to answer him. I said, well, sometimes being hungry can just kind of make you do or say things. Actually, you know what? No, that's not true. Let me start my answer over again. Times when we're hungry or tired or other things like that are opportunities for what's inside of our heart to come out. And sometimes when we're hungry, the sin that's in our heart reveals itself. And when our sin reveals itself, we need to be quick to repent. We need to be quick to say we're sorry. So from now on, that's what that magnet means. Because we can't take this lightly. What comes out matters. It's not an accident. What we do matters. Because Jesus says that what comes out reveals the heart. But for sake of argument, why does it matter that we find out what's going on in the heart? Instead of trying to explain the answer to that question, I'd like to simply answer it the way that Jesus did, by telling a second story. Why does it matter that we find out what's going on in the heart? Because a flood is coming. There was a man who was building a house, and he dug deep, and he laid a foundation on the rock. When the flood came, the river crashed against the house, and it couldn't shake it, because the house was well built. But there was another man who built a house down the road, and he asked, why dig deep? Why go through all the inconvenient trouble of worrying about what's under the surface? So he built his house on the ground. The river crashed against it also when the floodwaters came, and immediately it collapsed, and the destruction of that house was great. Why do you call me Lord, Jesus asks, but you don't do what I say? In other words, if there's no good fruit on the tree, why do you assume that I'm the master of the tree? If disobedience is being produced by your hearts, what makes you think that I am the Lord of those hearts? This is a serious question, because a flood is coming. When Jesus returns, he will be returning in judgment. This is a great comfort to all those who are found in him. It's a great terror to all those who aren't. But it is happening. Floodwaters are coming. Scriptures consistently talk about this time of sorting, the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the tares, the houses on the rock from the houses on the sand. Blessing in the kingdom, escape from God's judgment are dependent on your response to Jesus. That's what Luke is showing us kind of in this overall section. It's not just your actions that bring about the final verdict, but your actions do reveal your commitment to Jesus. Your commitment to Jesus determines where you'll stand. The flood is coming, and it will reveal every heart's foundation. That's why this is a crucial question for us to ask. And this should challenge and convict us. If you hear this message, and right now it kind of makes you worry and squirm in your seat, that's probably a good thing. I think Jesus intended his sermon to do just that. And I want to be honest with you about that on kind of two different levels. First, if you have not given your life to Jesus, this passage is a grave warning. If you more or less believe in God, but you've never taken any steps of confession or repentance or surrender, the impending flood should fill you with uncertainty and dread. Honestly, even if you call yourself a Christian, you've kind of gone through the motions, you've taken some of the steps that you've been told you're supposed to, but you just kind of feel coldness and disinterest. You don't really feel any kind of like burning devotion to Jesus. It is what it is. You believe in all, but it's not that big a deal. And then you read this passage, and it's black and whiteness, that bad fruit means a bad heart. And if that kind of scares you and makes you ask the question, like, does that mean I'm not even saved? I don't want to take that tension away from you. I don't want to kind of reassure you and try to make you feel better. If you feel coldness and disinterest, if you don't see any real fruit on the tree, then that's a question that you seriously need to be asking. But secondly, kind of second level that I want to kind of be honest about the convictingness here. If you genuinely are a disciple of Christ, if he is your king, if you are God's child, you hear this message, you still feel really challenged and convicted. I think that's also a good thing. I think you're meant to feel that way too. If you're kind of asking the question like, well, I do still see some bad fruit. Like I do still see bad fruit produced by the sin that's in my life. What does that mean? I'm also not going to kind of like shrug that away and say, no, you're a good tree. You have a good heart. Like sure, all of us have some bad fruit. Like none of us are perfect, but deep down, you're still good. Now, I'm not telling you that if you see any fruit of disobedience, that it means you have no love for God in your heart. But I am telling you that if you see fruit of disobedience, there is something other than love for God in your heart. It is coming from something, and it's not coming from love for God. If you're impatient with your children, I'm not saying that you have no love for your kids, but I am saying that something other than love for your kids exists in your heart. It's not love for your kids that's producing that impatience. Something else is in there too, and we need to be honest about that. We don't just say, well, I don't really like kind of the fruit that's coming out, but I know it's got to be coming from a good place because I know it's all good in there. No, there's something that needs to be rooted out. If you're struggling with sin, Christian brother or sister, I'm not telling you that you aren't saved, but that doesn't mean don't be convicted. Because something other than right belief and love for God is taking root in your heart, and that needs to be dealt with. And it needs to be dealt with far more aggressively and far more promptly than you would address issues with your car engine and your house's foundation. And if you knew you had a problem with your engine or your foundation, I think you would probably be leaving here to go to an appointment to get that looked at. And I want to close with this. We've kind of reached this point, kind of here at the end of Jesus' sermon. How do you build a good foundation? What do you do now? Well, first, if you haven't yet, you surrender to the lordship of Jesus. He is the firm foundation. If you're trying to do this on your own, or you're kind of cobbling together some personal spirituality concoction, it's not going to work. The river will crash against that house, and the destruction of that house will be great. And second, if you already have that firm foundation of Christ, and you want to know what to do now, kind of how to build on it, how should you act in response to these things? I would remind you that this is the conclusion of a sermon that Jesus just preached. If you've gotten to this point and you're asking, what do I do now? Go back and practice the sermon again. Go back to the start and read it again with this understanding. And practice these things. Build on that foundation. Disadvantage yourself now, because the riches of the kingdom are coming. Not just for your friends, but for your enemies. Be merciful, like your Father is merciful, even to those who actively seek to do you harm. Instead of judging or condemning, give and forgive. See to your own holiness, wage war against your own sin, so that you might grow in mercy and be able to help your brother. Because when you apply yourself to helping your brothers and your sisters remove splinters from their eyes, only what's inside you is going to come out. If you haven't developed a heart of mercy, mercy isn't going to be produced. Grapes don't grow on brambles. Pay close attention then to how you walk, because it'll tell you lots about your foundation. And you need to be assured of the foundation, because the floodwaters are coming. And like we sung earlier, our goal is that we would all be found in Christ on that day. The floodwaters are coming, and may we be houses that stand when they do. Let's pray.